That's why we're here. That's why we were really happy at the SRA to sponsor this event. We want to be very much working in collaboration as we go forward because, as I say, some of these issues are massive and are not going to be dealt with quickly or single-handedly by any one or other body. So that's the kind of hope for today. Very interested to hear observations from the audience and questions. I'm very happy to be taking part. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. So, Belle, can I come to you next for some opening remarks?
Yep, I'll try not to keep it too long, but I know that access to justice has been reported as one of the main challenges facing both the legal sector and society as a whole, and we know that a right to a fair hearing is meant to be enshrined in our laws, universal and inalienable to all society, but unfortunately that's not the case at the moment, and what's preached is not practiced. Recent evidence from the Legal Needs Survey estimates that 3.6 million people a year in England and Wales fail to have their legal needs met in resolving a dispute or creating a justice gap where people can't afford to pay for legal services but are not poor enough to be eligible for legal aid. Money provided by the government to cover legal costs, that's not, it's almost non-existent, and I think it's become a particular problem. I know when it turns to migrants, and what we really need is vital investment and funding in the legal, local government, education sectors that will drive today's theme of a people-centred approach for improving access to justice, particularly for vulnerable groups and those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. But austerity has made this very, very difficult. Past 10 years of Tory rule have absolutely decimated this provision. Since the Legal Aid Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Act in 2012, civil legal aid cuts have been reduced in the areas of law for which legal aid was available, and we're talking about £350 million a year. Moreover, legal aid fees have decreased by 34% in real terms since 1998. And before I became a Member of Parliament myself, I worked for a Member of Parliament, Diane Abbott, and managing her office. I can tell you that second only to Brexit, the thing that her office received the most communication about, and I believe it was the same right across the board with MPs, was that the Legal Aid Act. That was it, the amount of emails that came through at the time was amazing. It showed just how much of an impact it had. But also it was a time when we didn't have as many of those template emails that many people send out, in terms of, you put your postcode in and it sends it directly to your MP. People were writing themselves a lot individually to challenge the legal aid gap, because that's how bad it was. Now current trends are showing that within 5 to 10 years there won't be enough legal aid solicitors to sustain the duty solicitor scheme in many of our regions, which is a tragedy in terms of not just resources, but not resources in terms of funding, but resources in terms of people actually working there. And when you add a 38% real terms cut in central funding for local government and a 9% cut to spending per pupil since the Conservatives came into power, you have a cruel and really emaciated funding right across multiple government departments. So just some of the policies I think we need. First, we need to listen to many of the professional legal associations, including the former Supreme Court President, Lady Hale, big fan of hers, warnings and her warnings about the consequences of the cuts to legal aid and work to restore vital funding investment. You should listen to the Labour Party, which I hope is why we're here. The 2019 manifesto called for the restoring of all early legal aid advice, including for housing, social security, family and immigration cases, which has been massive. Recruiting hundreds of new community lawyers, promoting public and legal education, and to build an expanding network of law centres. Our law centres locally do so much work, but the individuals that work in them are exhausted. They're exhausted because they're doing so much with so little, and ensuring legal aid for inquests into deaths in state custody. I think that's really, really important. Consulting on civil legal aid means a means tested level and acted on in the criminal legal aid review. So I think that's important. Defending workers' ability to recover legal representation costs from negligent employers, which I hope you'd think that a Labour politician would say anyway. So those are just some things I think we do need moving forward, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Belle, and welcome, Ellie.
Sorry, I'm late.
Not at all. Shall we come to you next? Does that work for you?
Yeah, if you want to.
Fantastic.
That's fine. Thank you.
Over to you, Ellie, to make some opening remarks.
Thanks very much, and my apologies for being a little bit late. Just want to start by thanking the IPPR and the Solicitors Regulation Authority for organising this event on such an important issue. We are all likely to need legal help at some point in our lives, so high quality legal services are essential. But access to these services is becoming increasingly difficult, and we're seeing more and more of an emergence of a two-tier system. It's an absolutely fundamental issue that needs to be addressed, and one that, as Shadow Solicitor General, I am very focused on trying to address. I think innovation and technology can help, and look forward to discussing that a bit more today. But we really do need quite urgent access to ensure that access to legal services does not come out of the reach of so many people. The legal aid sector was largely excluded from support during the pandemic, and over the last decade we've seen spending on legal aid cut by around 35%. Under the Legal Aid Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Act, LAPSO, a terrible piece of legislation which has put legal aid outside of scope of so many areas of law, including almost all private family law, employment, and I was an employment rights lawyer for many years before entering Parliament, welfare benefits, housing, debt, clinical negligence, and most non-asylum immigration matters. From casework, as constituency MPs, I'm sure Belle will agree that very often people come to us needing help. What they need is a lawyer rather than a member of Parliament, but there are fewer and fewer places that we can refer our constituents to because legal aid provision is so lacking. Many people that would have previously been entitled to help are no longer entitled to it. Recent research found that 44% of those needing legal aid have a long-standing illness or disability, 38% are unemployed, 29% live alone, and it's often some of the most vulnerable in society, and their legal problems can often be particularly complex. And actually, the removal of early advice in things like housing, for example, is in the long term not cost effective at all, because if you've got a relatively straightforward issue with housing or benefits, if you can't get access to legal advice, then those problems may escalate and you could end up being evicted from your home or suffering mental health difficulties. Actually, the cost then ends up a lot greater than it would have otherwise been simply by getting early legal advice. So one of the key things would be bringing back that early legal advice. After the post-war recovery, legal aid was described as one of the great pillars of the post-war welfare state, and the reality is now that couldn't be further from the truth in terms of that safety net, and that support is there. So it's absolutely clear that the government has to reverse this trend and repeal LASPO and address the fact that legal aid is now out of the reach of so many. I just want to quickly, I'm conscious of time, but I just want to quickly address diversity, if that's okay. Another issue with access to legal services is diversity within the profession. The LAMI review highlighted that a representative workforce, including the judiciary and lawyers, is important to achieving fair outcomes and improving trust in the legal sector. The solicitor profession is more diverse than ever in terms of ethnicity and gender. However, a lot more work is still needed to ensure that the legal profession reflects the wider community, and huge problems remain. Just 8% of court judges and 12% of tribunal judges are from black or minority ethnic backgrounds. And the Judicial Appointments Commission has made pretty small progress actually in terms of diversity within the judiciary. You know, when you look at the Supreme Court, the fact that we have never had a Supreme Court judge from black and minority ethnic background is just truly shocking. So a lot more needs to be done, both to increase diversity within the legal profession, but also in the judiciary. And I think that we really need to get to grips with this issue because it is affecting access. I pay tribute to the work of the Solicitors Regulation Authority because I know this is an area that they have been doing a lot on. Finally, just on digital technology and what can be done in relation to access to legal services. I think that as we move to a more digital age, there is scope for that being able to increase access. However, I think we also need to recognise that a lot of people within the country still don't have access to the online. And what I don't want to see is moving away from a model of face-to-face advice, which particularly for some of the most vulnerable people that need access to legal advice is really, really important, to an entirely digital model. I can remember a conversation I had when I was on the Justice Select Committee with Lucy Fraser, a Conservative MP who until recently was my opposition Solicitor General, and she said, you know, it's okay that, you know, there isn't as much legal aid because we're going to create this app. And we're going to create an app which means that you can go onto this app and you can get legal advice for your problem. I said, well, hang on a second, Lucy. You know, you're a QC. You know, I was a lawyer for a decade before entering Parliament. And you know that actually, you know, you can't just look on an app to get advice to your legal problem, because actually lawyers look at the case and they apply the law to the facts of an individual case. You know, a lot of it is about speaking to your client, find out where the issues are. And if your client has particular vulnerabilities, actually that face-to-face meeting is vital. And the idea that an app could do away with actually that face-to-face. So I think there's a role for technology to complement proper access to legal aid and face-to-face advice, but not as a substitute for it. And I think we need to be quite careful about that. So I think a huge amount more needs to be done to improve access to legal services. I don't think we're going to see it under this government. Under Labour, we would have a very much a different approach, and one that would mean that actually, you know, we restore this idea of legal services being a pillar of the welfare state, and access to legal services being at the heart of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellie. And so, last but by no means least, I'm going to pass over to you, Helen, to open your remarks.
Lovely, thanks very much. Thanks for having me. I'm Helen Milner. I'm the Chief Exec at Good Things Foundation. We're a national and international digital inclusion charity. In the last 11 years, we've supported 4 million people to cross the digital divide in the UK and Australia. And we do this by working at the hyper-local level with thousands of community organisations, public libraries, community centres. Digital exclusion is massively linked to social exclusion, and we know that people who are socially excluded are much more likely to use public services. We ran a pilot, or really 4 mini pilots with HMCTS, so Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service, about providing what we call assisted digital, so helping people, vulnerable people in disadvantaged communities to be able to access, in a pilot sense, online HMCTS services. There were 8 services that we had within the pilot: PIP, employment support allowance, universal credit appeals, divorce, help with fees, probate. But 74% of the people that we did help needed help with social security and child support appeals. So it shows that very much that overlap between the digital exclusion and the social exclusion. The barriers that prompted people to come forward and get that support. And although HMCTS had a helpline, the vast majority, 90% of the people who came forward, were actually found and supported by that local community organisation. So the barriers were low digital skills, of course, but also that unaffordable digital access, low confidence, English as a second language, stress or a negative experience of government previously. So having that trusted local place with local people who knew them and understood them, but also those multiple and complex needs. We went on a journey with HMCTS, I think it's fair to say, and that because we believe that digital inclusion should form part of all government services, and that actually we tend to work with individual government departments in silos, and to not put it too bluntly, they want us to help people to fill in an online form. And you can imagine, particularly around the legal support, is that people really need holistic needs. And particularly, as I said, people coming in with stress and with multiple and complex needs. People were coming in. We really believe that they need that holistic support at that local level, not just the digital support, so emotional, procedural and legal. I think it's important to understand the human aspect of this as well as digital. Having said all of that, it's really important to say that I'm a massive believer in digitising of public services as long as we provide people with the support to be able to get access to it. It's more flexible, it's more convenient, and obviously with an ageing population, it's really important to understand how we put the costs in the right place. Obviously, legal aid should get more money, and we should spend less money on doing things we don't need to do for people who could do it. If you're interested in some of the stats about the pilots, we have reports on our website. We also today have published an infographic with all of the stats and information about who's digital excluded in the UK today. 10 million people lack the very basic foundation digital skills. And we've also today launched a blueprint for a way out of digital exclusion to fix the digital divide for good, once and for all. The first one is having a proper joined up government approach to fixing the digital divide for those 10 million people who lack those very basic skills. The second one is to double the size of the network of local places for people to get support to 10,000 community locations. And the third one is around affordable internet. We had a blueprint last year where we called for a data poverty lab to be established. We never thought that we would be the ones to do that. Nominet have supported us to set up a data poverty lab. And in July, we're able to launch a national data bank. Think of food bank for data. Affordability is only one of the barriers that people have, but it's really important that we're now going to be able to support 200,000 people with free mobile data to be able to help them to use the internet. That HMCTS have, so post-pilot, tendered for an organisation to provide this digital support for people on the ground on an ongoing basis for their digital services, and we declined to bid. Because of many of the things that other panellists have said, is that we know that we're very good at being in communities and helping people who are digitally excluded, but they need that comprehensive, holistic support. They need access to free legal help when they need it. And actually, you need to have that combination of the legal support as well as the digital support. So we're really interested to know if someone did bid and if HMCTS are going to issue that contract. But we've been very strong in our response to the government to say, this isn't the way to do it. You actually need a network to support all public services, but also you mustn't forget that people need that holistic support, not just the digital support.
Thank you so much, Helen. Fantastic. So I'm going to open up to questions from the audience. So who would like to speak first? There's a microphone at the back that will come to anyone who wants to ask a question. Who wants to go first? If not, I can kick off the questions. Oh, there's a lady over here.
Excellent.
If you'd say who you are at the start, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Rachel Blake. I'm a councillor in the London Borough Tower Hamlets, where I'm also the Deputy Mayor. I lead for adults and social care. And like Ellie and Belle, people come to me and they need representation. They need a councillor, they need an MP, but they also need a lawyer. And my other observation is that people often don't know that they need a lawyer, and there's only so much that that advocates like councillors and MPs can do. And so education about where you need a lawyer is a massive part of this for me. Tower Hamlets, we're a progressive local authority. We spend over $1 million on welfare rights advice, but that's not something that all local authorities will prioritise. So what more can the panel do around that education of people's rights, and what do we do as a movement on that issue? Because there are people on the ground that we don't just need a national solution to that. We need a kind of civil society and also representative democracy solution to that kind of issue, where people realise that they need a lawyer. And I couldn't agree more with the app, Ellie. I mean, the number of people that I don't need to tell you all my casework, but the number of people who are really struggling about the Universal Credit app and all the rest of it. So, you're right.
Fantastic. I'll take a couple if anyone else wants to come in at this point. Lady at the back.
Oh, hi. I'm non-practicing now, but I was a family lawyer, and I worked in West Yorkshire and Keighley, quite a deprived area. I was in a legal aid practice, but with a mixed caseload, as most of us have. I'm just amazed that there's still 2 firms still doing legal aid there, family legal aid, where there were 4 before. I'd just like to say that I'm pleased that this government now allows legal aid for non-molestation injunctions and accompanying Children Act applications. And I'm not a counsellor, but I would, if anyone has someone who comes to them and isn't that kind of need, my strong advice would be to refer them to a local solicitor that does legal aid, because they still are there. And sadly, what keeps some of them going is the fact that now every small firm has at least 1.5 fee earners just doing care proceedings. And I'm sure this is partly due to the fact that standalone Children Act proceedings you can't get legal aid for. But if you combine it with a non-molestation order application, then you get legal aid for both. Unfortunately, Ellie's probably heard me give my little spiel yesterday, but very unfortunately, the method of enforcing non-molestation injunctions, namely the way that injunctions are meant to be enforced quickly through contempt of court proceedings, is specifically disallowed, and has been for some years, along with other protective orders. And this really does need looking at, because once abused women, didn't have to be women, it could be same-sex couples or parents trying to get protection against addicted children. Once upon a time, it was enhanced by family judges being able to put powers of arrest on them, which empowered the woman, so that, if it was a woman, so that if the respondent used or threatened violence having been served, all she had to do was ring the police, and the police had an order there to arrest and bring back to the family court before a senior judge the next working day. It was a big deterrent, because nobody likes to have their day disrupted by being arrested and then put before a judge to account for their behaviour, with a prospect of up to 2 years imprisonment or an unlimited fine. It's what Priti Patel did the other day with the M25 protesters. Much more effective than issuing criminal law proceedings. So it was a mistake to disallow judges from attaching powers of arrest. And I've got a card and I've got a petition to go to Dominic Reeve, and if anyone is interested, which I hope you all will be, you'll take one before you go. Thank you very much.
And I'm going to abuse my position of chair to add a third question, which is across all areas of policy, and we've seen the pandemic has really shifted things and changed the way things work. So there's both been innovation, but also it's exposed very stark inequalities. So I'd be interested to know what your observation is of the impact of the pandemic specifically on these issues, whether things are getting worse or better, and where there are pockets of innovation that we can actually take some hope from. So we've got 3 questions there: public education, the impact of the pandemic, and this lady's petition about non-molestation and abuse. Who would like to open up first? That'd be great. Off you go.
Thanks. Rachel, you make a really, really important point about public legal education. We need more of it. And actually, funnily enough, the former Justice Secretary, Robert Buckland, was actually something that he was quite keen on, and we were sort of pushing a bit of an open door on public legal education with him. I don't think Raab is going to take the same approach. He's more interested in ripping up the Human Rights Act than he is on actually sort of making sure people know their rights in the first place. So I'm not optimistic about that, but it is a really, really important point, and one that I fully agree with. You spoke about legal aid. I mean, one of the problems with access to support is the income thresholds for legal aid. The means testing for legal aid is set at such a level that actually very few people are entitled to it, even for the areas that are still in scope for legal aid. So you've got sort of 2 hurdles. First of all, a lot of stuff's been taken out of scope. Secondly, the means testing means it's very hard to then access it. One of the things that we have been calling for, and we've got support from it's actually led by the Bar Council and others, is having non-means tested legal aid for victims of domestic abuse, because you have this horrific situation where in the family courts, women end up, and it is predominantly women, end up representing themselves in court against their abuser because they don't qualify for legal aid. So if you had non-means tested legal aid for victims of domestic abuse, I think that would be a step in the right direction. Shall I stop there to allow other panellists to come in on some of the other issues as well?
Thanks, Ellie. Val, do you want to go?
Yes, just to say on education overall, I think that's an issue in every single aspect when it comes to society and how we interact with our democracy. I find it so worrying how little we're taught in school about how what we do as individuals or what we do as citizens affects government, how to engage in the process, how we could become a councillor, how you could become an MP, how you could end up coming to a conference like this. That's a major issue overall. And in terms of what we can do about it, I think what we have to do is fill the gap, as we have done with everything else that the government have failed to provide. We've done it with food banks, sadly. We've had to do it in terms of, in terms of legal aid, in terms of people offering a lot of pro bono advice. In terms of education, we're going to have to do the same. We're going to have to take it upon ourselves to educate people about what it is that is available to them, what it is they might need, more than on an app, of course, because that could go wrong, as Rachel pointed out, and just make sure we can do that as much as possible until we do get a Labour government the next time round, and then we can depend on Ellie to institute in education on these matters as part of our policy. And in the impact of the pandemic, it's been worse for everything. But one thing I would say is that it's not that it's turned things completely. What we have to realise is actually some of these things were quite bad already. It's just shone a light on them, and it's just exacerbated them in a way that's made everybody see. But these things have been going on for years and years, about a decade, coincidentally, and it's just got worse and worse from there. And I just think about what you were saying about means testing and domestic abuse. I know recently with Tower Hamlets, we had the MP Epsana Begum and the issue that she faced, and I think to myself, working with them, finding out all of that justice is really for the rich. which is not justice at all. And that's become such a major issue. If you do not have access to the money to defend yourself, you either find yourself in jail or in debt. And that's just a really, really vicious cycle to go down. So, you know, those are some of the things that I think we would need to change in terms of people accessing justice. It has to be equal, or rich people end up getting off with just about everything, and quite literally your socioeconomic status, other than all the other different things that you may face, your gender, your sexuality, being disabled or being from an ethnic minority, quite literally your socioeconomic background determines whether or not you get justice, determines whether or not you end up in prison or not, and that can't be right. So anything that we could do to make that fairer, Ellie.
No pressure.
When we're in government, yeah.
She's going to be very busy.
Yeah, she's very busy.
Tracy.
Well, as you'd expect from the regulator, we are trying to be solutions focused. So we absolutely accept that nothing is going to be that easy. There are an awful lot of issues that the COVID pandemic threw up, but I think there are a few bits on the horizon. So only recently we were awarded some money for something called the Regulator's Pioneer Fund, which we're big advocates of. And we've just got a project that we're getting underway about how do you solve the problem of advice deserts? How do we, as the regulator, not sort of set targets and things that people won't meet, but work at a local level? Very much, as Helen was saying, a lot of these things are about trusted people who are saying to people, you need to get advice. Don't just accept that you can't. This is a possible route. So we're looking at that. We very much want to work in collaboration with all sorts of organisations. So we've been working also with some university law schools. People forget that actually, if you are training to be a lawyer, there's all sorts of parts of that training that means that you can actually help in at a community level, and it helps inform you and be a better solicitor from the minute you start. And it's another aspect of EDI and so on that we really try and advocate for as a regulator. I've been in Whitehall for many years, and when I was in the Equalities Office in my last civil service job, I was always struck by everybody said they were doing brilliant things. But of course, are they brilliant? Who is judging? How does it make a citizen feel better? How does it make somebody who's been a domestic violence victim seek that they can get help, even someone they can trust to talk to initially, let alone before they get professional advice? So all of these things are not to be sort of taken as simple things, but if we don't talk about them, and we see this very much as the regulator, we've got to, you're never going to get solutions that are going to last. In defence of technology and an app, one of the things we found did work during COVID was for domestic violence abuse, which we all know absolutely rocketed. It's a sad fact that we don't talk about enough. Actually, a couple of local authorities that at least put people in touch with a duty solicitor through an app was actually a bit of a help. So I think it's how they are used, and they are never sufficient on their own, and using them as an enabler I think can work. The other thing I wanted to say is all of us need to think much more about the law as another consumer service. So the Competition and Markets Authority, you wouldn't think it was a natural bedfellow of that change that's going to drive innovation in the legal sector, but their last review last year came up with lots of interesting things about why is certain aspects of legal advice so expensive? How come that it can't be a bit more like open banking or some of the things where actually you can cut the costs because you do different bits in different ways? So we're just starting off what we're calling an unbundling pilot, and I would really, really urge people to come and just look at the SRA's website occasionally and think about how could you help us? Some of the stuff you're doing at local level, could we be helping partner us in projects that we've got underway? We have a new bit of the site called the SRA Innovate Space, and that is very much about how local authorities can come to us early with questions and that we can kind of adapt some of our processes and some of the work we do. We've just been working with the DCT sites. The profession weren't massively keen to start with, but actually COVID taught us that if you didn't have some mechanism of explaining what services are available and how, and linking up at a sort of local authority level, that was a bit of a gap. So we've just done some activity, we're just doing some consumer research around whether that's worked or not, has that actually helped alleviate some people's needs. But, you know, advice deserts are something that we've got to tackle, because I think otherwise you're not going to get people the help that they need, and it just causes greater problems problems in society in the longer run. The other thing I just wanted to flag is I think there should be a distinction in terms of what kind of law are we talking about. I call it people law. I think that's the thing where there's the biggest gap. Big city law firms are probably embracing technology in completely different ways. They're looking at it from how they become sort of, a different service to other businesses and so on. Very few people are looking at small business needs, and I think they'll start to go up. So people law for me embraces the citizen, the individual, but it also embraces small businesses, and I think that's something, again, as a regulator, we're looking at more seriously now. I think there's a potential gap there. So please don't think that we just do all the stuff classic regulators. Of course we do all of that. We set the standards, we enforce, we take action and investigate if anything is inappropriate. But my job is Executive Director, Strategy and Innovation, and I want a strategy that works for everybody and that people see we add value as a regulator. So we want to collaborate. So it's a bit of a plea. We're trying and we're looking at some of these issues. Not always easy for the regulator to do that because those we regulate who pay for us sometimes are a bit resistant to change. But we are here to make some change happen that benefits everybody.
Thanks, Tracy. Helen.
Great. It's really interesting to talk about apps that quite often when I'm in rooms when people talk about apps, it's normally like people have got a solution but they don't know what the problem is. It's always a solution in search of a problem. And I think all the panel are saying is technology absolutely can help. It's about applying it in the right way and making sure that people have support to use it. That one of the things that we did, like we do with a lot of our work, but also with the HMCTS pilot, is I like to think of it as an ecosystem. It's very much about our thousands of community partners who have embedded digital inclusion into work that they do anyway, and that they're there as part of the signposting and referral across that local area, by counsellors, by GPs, by many people, so to say that they are the trusted face within that community. And then at Good Things Foundation, I call it a big club with a shared vision, is that the thousands of community organisations coming together and working together because we share a vision that we should fix the digital divide. You asked about the pandemic and innovation. Absolutely, as Belle said, that from a digital exclusion point of view, the pandemic exposed a deep digital exclusion that was there pre-pandemic. It exposed data poverty that was there pre-pandemic, and it exacerbated it. So the people, as always, the people on the bottom of the pile got pushed further behind. What we know, though, within the whole population who lack essential digital skills, 5.6 million people did actually get better skills and improve their situation around digital. But that means as the digital divide narrows, it deepens. So there's, as I said, 10 million people who lack the very, very basic digital skills that they need to thrive. You asked about innovation, so let me tell you a little bit about innovation. One of the things that we've been working with our community partners to do during the pandemic is actually support people with devices and free access to the internet. We've supported now, I think, around 23,000 people. And many of those, particularly in the first lockdown, had never, ever used the internet before. So you could say, well, how could you just give someone a tablet and access to the internet? They don't know how to use it. But the innovation was that we worked with our community partners to actually make sure that those people could get that support remotely, and that none of us thought that we could do that before. Like, we'd never, ever even dreamt of doing that previously. And lots of those people may never have actually come to a physical community centre because they were older and isolated and living alone. So that was one innovation. I think actually getting the devices, getting action on data poverty is other innovation that has come forward. And on the HNCTS pilot, we also have been able to do some of that signposting that we do so well face-to-face on the ground remotely as well. So including people digitally, giving them free access, and then making sure they're signposted to the support they need for their digital skills, but also for their legal support, has been something else we've been able to do. So again, necessity driving forward that innovation. Just on technology, I think that what I always believe is that technology is there to do the heavy lifting. Let's get technology to do all the stuff it can do. That, you know, let's not waste lots of money. Let's use the simple technology and let human beings do the stuff that human beings are really good at. And so it's about that blend of human support alongside the technology support.
Fantastic. I'm going to take one more round of questions or comments. So who would like to come in at this point? Anyone want to come in?
I have a question for Helen.
There's a microphone coming just behind. If you say who you are as well, that'd be great.
My name's Matthew. I work for Luther Pendragon. We're a public affairs agency. I thought it was really interesting how you're saying that the Good Things Foundation's work is focused on local services. I was just wondering if there was a kind of separate stream of national or international things that you do as well alongside that.
Great. And anyone else want to come in at this point? There's a lady at the back on the left. My left.
Apologies, I came in late, so it may have been covered. But picking up on the point about the digital divide, some of us have known this for quite a long time for the black communities, and it's been around in statistics, so I'm wondering what else might have been missed for specific minority communities.
Great question. Anybody else want to come in at this point? If not, I will add another question for panelists, which is a point you picked up on actually, Elio, about diversity in the profession and what we could really do to ensure that going forward we have a much more diverse profession. So we've got a question about international activities for Helen, a question about particular access issues and justice issues for minority groups, and a question about diversity in the sector. Shall I hand over to you to start first, Helen, and then I'll come.
So we work with local organisations, but we tend to work at a national level. So, for example, we provided support with the online census. So that's a national initiative and programme. And then if people need some help to fill in their form, then they came along to the online centre. We also do work with NHS, for example, to help people to access NHS services, but also to understand how they potentially could use the internet to improve their health. So it's locally delivered, but it's like nationally or internationally conceived. Specifically on international, we have a subsidiary charity in Australia. So if you're in Australia, then we do exactly the same thing in Australia. And we're working with 2 NGOs, one in Poland and one in Romania, to have a look at how we can share best practice and experience around that local and national network model. So again, it's about making sure we're training and supporting and providing grants for local volunteers and tutors, but also creating sort of national and international tools and content and resources that is all free. It's all free for the end beneficiary. It's all free for the community organisations. And then we work with government departments like ONS, but also so with Google.org or Lloyds Bank for them to pay for it so that we can get that on the ground. And then the lady about the digital divide and minority communities, absolutely. It's a really good point. We work with a lot of minority communities. As I said earlier, you might not have missed it, is that digital exclusion and social exclusion massively overlap. So 90% of people in the UK who are digitally excluded are also socially excluded, and a lot of that is about income. And so if you're in a minority community where it's low income, then absolutely there needs to be that local support. We're only in 5,000 communities. We'd like to be in 10,000 communities, so that's our goal for the next few years. And if that minority community has English as a second language, then often that support is also there, either to help them in another language, or to help them to develop the English language skills alongside the other support that they need.
Tracy, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so picking up about the diversity in the profession, obviously as the regulator of the profession, we are constantly putting out data. You'll see that there are some trends that go in one direction, but they're not necessarily big increases. We're just about to commission research. We're working with quite a few academic institutions to understand what are the real barriers. Are these barriers true of other professions? Is the law different to accountancy or medicine or what have you? What is it it that's going on? Is there a distinction between the kind of law firms people join and the backgrounds in which they come from? When and why in the education system do people not think about certain things? Obviously, I think many of you will have heard of the new SQE route to qualifying as a solicitor. That's just about to go into its first round. Very encouraging registrations for that. That's something that's going to be potentially really, really important for people who can't get the sort of training in one of the bigger firms. There's a lot of people who tell us really quite worrying things about, you know, what their perceptions are of law as a profession. And of course, that then goes on to compound things like the digital divide in society, because if you don't have lawyers who are people who share the understanding of the background or the issues that you're wrestling with as the person who needs advice, that can also be a barrier to the law working for people, or people perceiving that it's there and fair and operating in the public interest. So obviously, as the regulator, the public interest is why we're here. We're here to ensure that the profession has high standards, so we can't just allow anyone to qualify as a solicitor, but equally, more and more people in younger levels in school should think that it's a career choice for them. And that is about all of us pulling together to ensure that people's aspirations can be met, the education system and so on can encourage and deliver that. And I think that's the sort of thing that everybody needs to work together on. I'm touched by what Helen says about, you know, simple things can make a big difference. My view would be simple things that are done across all sorts of regulatory bodies. You know, the law is a very interesting regulatory model. You've got the Bar Council, the Bar Standards Board, you've got the SRA. People often think the Law Society are almost the regulatory profession. How could that be, that the voice of certain people seems to be notched up more than others? So I think we can all work on that and just actually explain why it's in the public interest that every profession in this country is diverse and people recognise them as diverse.
Fantastic. Belle?
And with the digital divide, absolutely, minority communities are worst affected, and not just because of you know, what they look like and what they'll generally have access to, because we've actually got 80% of Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities in this country living in the poorest areas of this country. And if they're living in the poorest areas of the country, has the worst infrastructure in terms of you know, proper broadband and major issues with that and everything in between. And the government are talking about levelling up, but unfortunately their levelling up their idea of levelling up is not actually looking at the poorest constituencies, is looking at the constituencies where there are Tory seats and doing things like that. And again, these tend to be the least diverse seats. So where money is now being funneled to, you're not going to get the most for those minoritized communities. And I think about during the pandemic and all of everything that had to be accessed. So if you wanted extra support, you had to apply for it online. How on earth were you going to do that if you didn't have access to a computer, if you didn't have access to Wi-Fi? Which is why I'm still very much for free broadband. I know they called it broadband communism when we came out with it as a policy a few years ago. But thinking of everything that's happened over the past year and a half, I think you're going to have a generation of people that come out, you know, in the next couple of years, believing that access to broadband access to proper Wi-Fi is actually a right. People won't book places to stay if they don't have Wi-Fi. People will literally, well, I'm not sure if it's extreme as going to a different airport, but if an airport doesn't have Wi-Fi, for example, people get very, very touchy. There's so many different situations in which, you know, leisurely or otherwise, people will need access to that, and if people need access to it, then it has to be free. And in terms of diversity in the sector, I've been really, really concerned about that overall. I know there have been some quite senior black Asian ethnic minority solicitors or judges even that have had to take the judiciary to court over a number of different issues. It doesn't seem to be something that has been taken seriously. I know it's definitely impacted the group that I'm involved in, Society of Black Lawyers. Our chair had a serious issue, and a lot of people have had to have these things settled out of court. But I don't think it's as simple as having senior judges do what is that training that they make people do? Unconscious bias training. That's it. I mean, like you show people one video and all of a sudden they think that they're experts on race and diversity. And no, I couldn't possibly be racist. I watched my unconscious bias video, that's creating an issue. We need to accept that there's institutional racism in all of our organisations and actually work to change it instead of trying to skirt over it. And in terms of people getting into it, I think about my own experience of studying law. I thought, great, I'm going to get myself a career, I'm going to study law. It looks like the place where you can cause the most trouble but still have a respectable profession. And someone did say, do you know, it's really expensive. I was like, money, we'll find money. And I got broke. And obviously, for someone from my background, it's very easy to get broke when attempting to study law. I was very lucky in that I slowed it down eventually, and at that time, Diane needed someone to fill in for, this was about 10 years ago. I didn't leave Diane's office until 2019, but I went there 10 years ago to just earn a bit of extra money part-time to cover somebody that was sick. And I think about the amount of debt I got myself into studying law, and the amount of debt I got myself into at the time still affects me now. If you keep putting young people in that situation, it's never going to be an attractive prospect, especially if they're not going to make money, enough money to pay off their debts at the other end, and especially if it's such a struggle to get through overall. We need to change that, and if we change how much it costs, you'll see more diverse people getting into legal profession all the time. So yeah, free education, that was the point.
I hear today the government are thinking of going in the opposite direction on student loans. So.
Yeah, I bet.
Ellie, over to you.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to repeat what a number of panellists have already said, but I do want to say something about diversity in the legal profession. It's something that actually is really important to me. I went to a South East London comprehensive school where the reality is people didn't become lawyers. And I can remember before applying to university having a conversation with my dad and saying, I just don't know whether I should be applying to do law because I just don't know if people like me become lawyers. And my dad said to me, well, if you don't do it, Ellie, how will we ever change that? And actually that spurred me on, and that made me think, yeah, okay, all right, I'm going to apply. But, there are lots of bumps along the way, just in terms of my training and my pathway into the profession. I'm not going to say it was easy. It was really difficult to qualify and to get pupillage, and I felt like I faced discrimination along the way because I wasn't from that sort of traditional going into the bar background. So I feel really, really strongly that one of the things that in my role that I want to do is look at diversity within the profession, both in terms of social mobility and also around minority ethnic communities as well. I think it's really incredibly important. One of the things is just the cost of becoming a lawyer. It's so expensive. If you're a kid from a working class or just a not particularly wealthy background, to leave university and then to have to, get into thousands and thousands of pounds of more debt in order to qualify, unless you've got support from a Magic Circle law firm, and you might not want to go to work for a Magic Circle law firm. I certainly didn't. You're pretty much stuck, and like Beryl said, you ended up getting into a huge amount of debt. And actually, unless we look at pathways to qualification and the cost of qualifying, I think we're going to struggle on the diversity point. So I'd like to look at sort of the pathways to qualification as part of that diversity piece. And then there's also a point related to rates of pay, actually, in some aspects of law, criminal defence law, a lot of family law, immigration law, where actually the rates of pay now are so low that if you leave if you're not from a wealthy background, but you might feel passionately you want to go into this area of law, but you've got so much debt when you finish qualifying that actually it isn't an option. So you're ending up in a situation where, you know, some of the, you know, you're losing that talent pool. You're losing that talent pool of bright young lawyers who feel actually they've got to go and work in one of these city law firms because they can't afford to go and work for in an area of law that's less lucrative. And I think that is incredibly sad. So that links into that point about legal aid and properly funded legal services. Otherwise, we're going to see fewer and fewer people going in to the areas of law where we desperately need good lawyers doing that work and making a difference.
Thanks, Ellie. I think it's...
What else happened to immigration? Sorry.
Right.
And she said, just beware, Belle, you're not going to make any money.
Yeah. It's true. And then you end up in a situation where, you know, unless you've got kind of, you know, sort of financial backing, that you can't do it.
Can't do it.
And same in becoming an MP as well. So you've done 2 different career paths where you can get bankrupt just trying to get into the job. So we're going to wrap up in a few minutes. I'm going to take one last round of any comments or questions, and then I'm going to also ask the panellists to say some final remarks. And in particular, I'm struck at this Labour Party conference how much we talk about the world ending and the doomsday crisis. I'd like people to end on their really positive vision for what the future of legal support could look like. What would a good system look like? What would those characteristics? Before we do that, who would like to come in, ask any final questions of our amazing panellists before we wrap up? This is your opportunity. There's a microphone coming to you. If you say who you are as well, that'd be great.
Hello. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you. I'm Natalia from Hammersmith CLP. I'm just wondering, talking about access to BAME communities, what opportunities for working in collaboration with grassroots community-based groups are there in terms of the sector? I know in the past there has been a lot of work in terms of matching up frontline organizations that give social welfare advice with solicitor firms, and that has changed a lot in terms of accessibility and breaking those barriers and reaching out to migrant and ethnic communities. And there are wonderful organizations on the ground that do amazing work in terms of the initial access of social welfare advice. So just your thoughts on partnership and collaborative working with other grassroots initiatives.
Great, thank you. Who else wanted to come in? There was a few hands up earlier. The lady at the back.
Yes, just very quickly. Actually, for non-molestation order and accompanying Children Act proceedings, an application to stop the other side whipping away with the youngest child, there is under the domestic violence concession a pretty high means criteria. And I understand that someone could actually still qualify for public funding but have to pay £500. Now that might be someone on, an income of £18,000 or something. But £500 a month sounds a lot, but most of the work is done in the first month. And when you think that solicitors' fees start off at £220 plus VAT for an hour, letters, £22 plus VAT, phone calls, etc. And then the court fees, of course, are massive now. It's £500 now to file a divorce petition. So that's one point, that you shouldn't assume because somebody is naturally, almost starving, that they won't qualify for legal aid. And then the other thing is that apart from having a look at the, frankly, ineffectualness of non-molestation orders nowadays, the district judges who deal with these things, because they can deal with children matters and financial matters to do with the parties as well. That's jurisdiction which magistrates don't have. But the district judges urge legal aid to respondents in non-molestation order applications, because if they get a bit of legal advice, they behave themselves better, less panicky, etc. And that legal aid is always, it's never kind of open, it's always restricted. So even if it's just, as it always was in my experience, just to get legal advice and be represented on the inter partes hearing, the return date when both parties meet, That would be a very sensible thing and a fair thing. You can't just assume that every single person who asks for a non-molestation order, if it's a woman, is a goody-goody, and the other person is a liar and an evil person. Mostly they are good, but the one or two occasions when I've realised that clients I've had have been pulling the wool.
Thank you. And the lady at the front just here would be great. Thank you. If you say who you are.
I'm Penelope Gibbs from Transform Justice, and I'm sorry if this is covered because I came late, but I've done quite a lot of work looking at the experience of defendants and suspects in the criminal justice system. And at every point, what comes through is that there isn't any route for them really to have a voice about their poor experiences of the the occasional, most lawyers are good, but they can have poor legal experiences. The complaint systems are very formal and sometimes quite difficult to access. And I just wonder what the panel's views are on a better route to capture the real experiences of defendants and suspects in the criminal justice system.
Fantastic, thank you very much. So we've got a question on how we could work better with grassroots and civil society. We've got a question on complaints process and how we could make that better, fairer, and easier to access. And then if a kind of summary of what a kind of positive, future-looking legal support system might look like. I'm going to start with you, Ellie, if that's okay?
Yeah, thanks very much. I think that's a really good point about working with grassroots organisations, and actually a project that we did locally where I'm an MP was around unmet legal need, and actually a city law firm working in partnership with Southwark Law Centre came in, sat in my constituency surgeries, listened to the sorts of things that people were coming in with, largely housing, immigration and welfare benefits, and saw the sorts of access issues there were in terms of that unmet legal need. It goes back to the point that actually when people come to see you, they often need legal advice as well as seeing their Member of Parliament. And as a result of that project and that piece of work, Southwark Law Centre became Lewisham and Southwark Law Centre. And now we have that law centre doing that work. And I've worked very closely with them, and also, I work with a number of organisations in my constituency, for example, Lewisham and Refugee and Migrant Network, for example, and sort of linking up those two organisations so they can be talking to each other in the local area. And I think that kind of grassroots work is incredibly important and something that we did quite successfully locally in the constituency. Thanks, Penelope, for raising the issue around people's experience of the criminal justice system. And I think it's incredibly important to raise this point, particularly at a time when court backlogs currently stand at 60,000 and people are waiting 2 years or more for their case to get to trial. And actually people are losing confidence in the criminal justice system. I do a lot of work in my role around rape prosecutions, which are at their lowest level ever. But also it's an area of law where victims are pulling out before their case gets to court because of actually the trauma of waiting all that time for their case to get to court, and also how they feel they are treated by the criminal justice system. So we're doing a huge amount of work around that, and in terms of changing people's experience of the criminal justice system, and looking at how we can just stop this situation where victims are pulling out of their cases because they feel so let down by the system. It's completely not on, and something that we're doing a lot to tackle. Sorry, that was very doom and gloom. That last one, the complete opposite of what you asked me to do. Look, I think the fact that we, have gathered here today in Brighton when there's a really busy conference agenda to talk about these issues is a really important first step in all of this. It shows that people are thinking about these issues and people do care, and that we're not just sort of shouting into a void when we talk about these issues in Parliament. So actually, looking forward, I think it's important to get this issue up the political agenda, getting justice issues any kind of coverage in the press, even on conference floor can be quite difficult. So actually trying to move it up the agenda, within the Labour Party and making it a priority is really important, and that's why I'm very grateful that this event's taken place today.
Anything I feel I can do to help, we're always happy to champion these issues. Belle?
I just think what was in terms of grassroots civil society organisations, I think a lot of that is about meeting people where they are. I think we have to realise that we can, even when you're offering things for free, minoritised communities don't necessarily feel comfortable with establishment, and there's a number of different reasons as to why that is. Mostly because they're having issues with establishment. It feels like they're trying to get them. So sometimes it's as simple as going to a particular community and speaking in their language. I know at times when we run surgeries, we may want to go to. I've got quite a large Latin American community, sitting with people who will speak in Portuguese and translate for us. And these people are living in the UK, they're Portuguese speakers, and their English may at times be fine, but actually speaking in their language is more comfortable for them, and it feels like somebody's taken the effort, although it's not me because I know Portuguese. And someone's taken the effort to take the time to meet them where they are, speak in their language and make them feel more comfortable and actually more confident and articulate in what they're saying because they're doing it in something that, in a language that they've spoken their whole life. Just something as simple as that. So not just offering stuff, if you're just offering it, it's like, not sure about you. But actually meeting them where they are. And just in terms of a positive thing, I think people are more likely to be able to, more likely to feel better if they're empowered. Again, just offering things not enough, but if they feel like they have the information, they feel like they've been educated in a way that makes them understand what their rights are, and then on top of that, they actually have access to the resources to have that support, be it better legal aid, etc. They'll feel a lot better about things, and I think not just feeling a lot better about things, actually have better outcomes because they've been empowered to understand what it is that they need and have the resources to go out and seek it and get justice that way. At the moment, if justice is kept in a situation where you can only get it if you pay, and you're paying through the nose, then there is really no justice at all. I've been really pleased, and I guess it has been in response to this government and how bad they've been, to see more and more people demanding their rights, understanding what their rights are, understanding that these things have been taken or are to be taken away from them. And I think that's probably the first step. It's unfortunate that things have to be so dire before everybody raises a fist in the air, but a fist nonetheless, and that's positive.
Thanks, Val.
I'm going to have to...
No worries. I'm going to come to you to wrap up the session, so I'm going to go to you now, Helen.
Luckily my positive point was, Natalia, you've said it, it's actually about making sure that we are looking at all of the grassroots organisations, civil society, and making the signposting, the linking up happen at a national level, but also sharing that best practice, at the local level and sharing that best practice nationally, because our experience from the pilot working with HMCTS was being able to provide support to thousands of people required us to link with other local civil society organisations. And I think my last point around positivity is that, so as I said earlier, we've launched our blueprint to fix the digital divide, and actually there's so many complex issues we've been talking about today, but that one is fixable. We know we can do it. There's been a lot of movement during the pandemic It's great to have a lot of the telcos and mobile operators on board. So we're going to be able to support hundreds of thousands of people who are in data poverty. So that I know we're eating the elephant one bite at a time, but I think that we can fix the digital divide. I know that isn't going to fix all of the problems that people have been talking about in this room, but if we can fix something, let's get on and do it.
We'll take progress, yes.
Yeah.
Tracy, over to you to wrap up today's session.
Well, how can you? I mean, we just touched on so much. I think what it says to me, though, is there is an appetite for collaboration. There is an appetite for people like us, the regulator, to join with other public policy thinkers and to work across all parties to tackle this, because without it, the society and our role in, the general good life of British people is going to be diminished, and we can't have that. I think things like using information and data, putting it much more readily into a format that people understand. Digital isn't going to work for everybody. It could work really well for some people. Some people's whole life is in the palm of their hand. My young children, that's certainly for sure. I think go with the grain of where we can. Don't let people get left behind. I think choice is very important. I don't see why people do not think that they should have a choice. And accessing services, understanding costs, understanding how you complain about a solicitor. Maybe there's something for us to be more explicit about that. People tell me they're very fearful of complaining or feel they can't make any kind of complaint about the system and how it's worked for them. So some mechanism for capturing some of that, I think, is a good thing. I'll put in a plug for Legal Choices, which is our effort to really try and get public legal education moving, and we do that in collaboration with lots of the other legal regulators. So there are mechanisms, and a special plea I would say is do not keep quiet. The more that we can identify common issues and really work on them together, I do think is where it will help, because I'm struck by some people, trust is not easily built. And some people trust certain institutions and organisations in their life, and if actually there could be some joining up to deliver messages around legal need and where we're meeting and where we're not, that would be a good thing. And finally, I would say it's never going to be easy or comfortable, because these issues are often ones, as everyone said, there are multiple problems, and actually it manifests itself as a legal need actually on the back of lots of other challenges. So the more that there is that genuine approach and doing things at a community level, we've just opened an office in Wales, and we're trying to offer advice in different ways. We want to try and get out into different communities. I think that if only you learn something from doing that, you might learn something and not manifest the same problem again. So I think that learning and that open learning would be a good thing for me, because I think that builds trust, and that to me would be the one word that we've got to get into this sphere. And thank you very much, IPPR, for doing such a great job. I thought it was a great discussion, and we've rattled through what was, a lot of issues.
Absolute pleasure, and thank you to all our panellists, thank you to SRA for supporting today's event, and thank you to all of you for coming in and making it such a great conversation. Make sure you help yourself to some lunch on the way out, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for coming and doing that. Yeah. Big issues.